Hello and welcome. Welcome for everyone that's joining us for today's Universal Peace Federation webinar. The Universal Peace Federation is an international and interreligious network of individuals and organizations, including representatives from religion, government, civil society, and the private sector, and it's dedicated to achieving world peace. UPF is an NGO in general consultative status with the UN Economic and Social Council. UPF supports the work of the United Nations, particularly in the areas of interfaith peace building, peace education, and the strengthening of marriage and family. Today's webinar is sponsored by the International Media Association for Peace, or IMAP, which is one of the associations of the Universal Peace Federation. And our topic today is journalism, free speech, and media bias in a rapidly changing world. Sounds like something that is very topical right now. Our moderator is Ray Lipowcan, who is the UPF Executive Director for Western Pennsylvania. Please join me in welcoming Ray.
Thank you, Peggy, and welcome to everyone for joining our Universal Peace Federation webinar today. And as Peggy mentioned, our topic today is journalism, free speech, and media bias. And we're going to be focusing more specifically on reporting on religion. So for those of us in America, we're really blessed to worship, in a sense, freely, but that's not the case in many parts of the world. And a lot of that has to do with how the media portrays religion in general, or sometimes a specific religion. So in other words, are they getting fair and unbiased coverage? So today we want to stand in solidarity with those who are being mistreated and misrepresented by the media. So we're going to explore specifically how the media can influence our perception of religion. And if anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. And if we have time at the end, we'll try to address your questions. So today we have two very accomplished journalists who have been reporting on religious freedom issues for decades, Mr. Larry Moffitt and Mr. Peter Zoehrer. And we're going to start with Mr. Peter Zoehrer. So Peter is a Vienna-based journalist, media analyst, and a committed defender of freedom of religion or belief. And the acronym is FORB, F-O-R-B. He co-founded the Forum for Religious Freedom in Europe, FOREF, that's an acronym, F-O-R-E-F, and has served as its executive director since its formal establishment in 2005. FOREF originated as early as 1998 as a media response to Austria's restrictive laws on minority religions. Under Peter's leadership, it developed into one of Europe's most active independent watchdogs for FORB, monitoring violations by both state and non-state actors. Peter has participated in numerous international conferences, fact-finding missions, and advocacy campaigns. In recognition of his contributions to press freedom and civil society, he was awarded the Silver Pin by the Austrian Journalist Club and is a member of Reporters Without Borders. So welcome, Peter. Thank you for joining us today. Well, let me introduce Larry, and if Peter shows up in the meantime, maybe we'll switch back to him. So Larry is our second speaker, who's now become our first speaker. And Larry is Vice President and Executive Director for the Washington Times Foundation and Secretary General for North America of the Universal Peace Federation. He's a former weekly columnist with the Washington Times, former Vice President of International Operations for United Press International, and editor of UPI's Religious News Service. He served as Vice President of Editorial Operations for Tiempos del Mundo newspapers, which published weekly in 19 cities and 17 countries of the Americas. He was also executive director of the World Media Association, a nonprofit that dealt with issues of the communication media's responsibility to society. So again, thank you and welcome, Larry.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Ray. I hope I hope his connection can recover. He is the religious freedom expert. He was going to talk about Europe and Africa. And I'll talk about the erosion or the values in America and where the slippage is and what that's looking like. Anyway, it's quite a challenge you're taking on with this topic beyond anything technical, and I applaud the intent of this webinar. There are not many venues dedicated to talking about the ethics of the mass communication media regarding the need for it to be a champion for human rights and freedom of religion and to be able to speak freely. The free press also has a healing function, that usually gets ignored. It has the capacity that's very seldom used, but it has the capacity to encourage intercultural, interracial, international, everything, communication and cooperation in the topics a society finds important to communicate about. Politics, the social order, ethical values, even sports and entertainment news. Of these things, it's our core values, spiritual and community, that are central and foundational for how we view everything else. That's what determines everything. So I guess the first question has to be, do the mass communication media even have a responsibility to uphold healthy values? And this is a legitimate question. Aren't journalists just supposed to say what happened, impartially report the news without fear or favor, as we say? We tell it like we see it, let the pieces fall we may, and leave it to you good people to sort everything out. That's what they taught us in journalism school in America. It was back at the dawn of time, but that's what we were taught. And it's still pretty much the ethic today. Impartial news pages and a vigorously opinionated commentary section is the ethical ideal of the news profession. However, even if we do report in a fair and balanced way, just the act of an editor selecting some stories to print and not selecting other stories determines what issues will end up as talking points on the national agenda. They will determine the conversation. In our media-driven culture, if a tree falls in the forest and NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox, or CNN and the internet isn't there to cover it, it never happened. A newspaper or television station is a fixed container of information that's pre-selected for you. You choose CBS or ABC or Fox and you read the New York Times or the Washington Times because you're watching and reading content that you find agreeable at some level. You choose your poison. The internet, however, is the Wild West.
This meeting is being recorded.
It's got everything, and people come to the internet with personal standards that are all over the map. After a while, the internet turns you into a container with all its little algorithms that keep track of where you land. They give you more of that instead of other things. So instead of you watching the internet watches you. It pre-selects what to offer you first. And the question, do you own it or does it own you? The answers I have in my mind are all very, very disturbing. Just when the photocopier made every person a publisher in the 1960s, the internet today makes every person a broadcaster with audiences numbering in the millions. And there are no governing ethics. A great myth is that entertainment is just entertainment. Sometimes a citizen advocacy group will criticize a movie studio or a record company for glorifying sex among 15-year-olds or violence in music. People who make violent video games and violent music insist, hey, we don't influence anybody. This is nothing more than entertainment. Your computer comes with an on-off switch and 500 channels. If you're offended, watch something else. If you don't like your kids watching it, monitor them. That's kind of a complete cop-out because nobody has 24/7 hours to be able to monitor your children's input of this ubiquitous media. And the children don't have the capacity to make those judgments. So I think the debate's pretty much finished about whether television, movies, and the internet shape our lives. There have been too many instances of copycat crimes, including killings taken from the media. Here's an example. Do you know what a 30-second spot, 30-second Super Bowl commercial is going to cost in February, this coming February? It was $7 million. It recently went up to $8 million. $8 million for 30 seconds. That's because advertisers know about influence and they are very happy to spend money to have it. We in the news and entertainment media have used the freedom of speech protection in the U.S. Constitution to steadily push back the envelope of acceptability in the public media, year by year, decade by decade, since the 60s, when even married couples had to sleep in separate twin beds, which was maybe a bit much. We have been so successful at pushing back and this erosion that we're now at the point where the period of innocence traditionally associated with childhood has almost been completely erased. There are some parents, however, who have been super diligent about protecting this window of innocence for their children, reducing screen time to an hour a day, for example, and monitoring it. Even busy parents can monitor that much input. Those people are heroes. Here's an example of the erosion of values caused by our culture that happened in one giant leap. The movie E.T. came out in 1982, Steven Spielberg's movie about this adorable little extraterrestrial guy who gets left behind on Earth. And one morning, the kids are arguing at breakfast about what to do. And the character Elliot, age 10, says to his slightly older brother, "It was nothing like that, penis breath." To some of us, and I was a hardened New Yorker in a New York theater. We felt a sucker punch to the gut. We're going along, there's cute children, a little animatronic alien, Reese's Pieces, and suddenly that. The reviewers in the mainstream media praised this line for its honesty and realism. Every child in America at 7 to 10 was sitting in the theater watching the movie. And it might have been okay a little bit in California or New York, but it was not okay in Lincoln, Nebraska. But this movie released it, and what they did is they put it into the culture. So it makes it okay to talk about it, or at least it puts it into the mix, puts it into the discussion. The media called it honesty. Who can be against honesty? Abe Lincoln was honest. The blame for this erosion is shared by every one of us. The media isn't evil. Those people aren't evil because those people are us. The men and women of the communication media are the people next door. They're us, literally. Their ethical values are our ethical values. The media helps erode our values because it's a concentrated presentation, but it was we who let it happen by our lack of attention to what is sacred in family. So let's not get all finger pointy. Anyway, that's where we are today. Now, my question posed at the beginning is, does the media have a responsibility to support and encourage the full set of human and religious freedoms and healthy life values? I think we do. In fact, I know we do. In a speech to the World Media Conference in the late 1980s, Reverend Sun Myung Moon reminded us that before you are an editor or a broadcaster, you are first a human being with a human being's God-given responsibilities to society. We're always talking about God-given rights, but there's God-given responsibility. We know that a great deal of the world's popular culture originates in the U.S. and gets exported. It's back and forth a little, but really the U.S. is the brunt of it, I think. We would look for Peter and some of our European viewers to sort that one out. A huge, enormous gap in our culture today, here, Europe, everywhere, is a general lack of critical thought and respectful discourse. Old-time editors with ice water in veins in the kind that raised me in this sorry profession, used to tell me our job is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And they would tell me editors don't have friends. The late Wes Pruden, editor of the Washington Times, was another editor that told me that. If journalists go against the grain of the prevailing media trends of political thought, they can really run into trouble in the friends department. So do this, get a job at the New York Times and walk in the morning of your first day at work into the newsroom wearing a big red MAGA hat and see if you don't run into problems in the friends department. However, if your moral rudder is an inviolable set of principles, like, say, the Ten Commandments, or even John Locke's political philosophy of God-given rights, then the temporary values of collegial friendship have to take a back seat. In the American constitutional framework, there are three estates: executive, legislative, and judicial. The press is commonly called the fourth estate because its influence is that pivotal, that crucial to the very survival of a free society. If the free press gets taken down or it voluntarily abdicates to some ideology and just follows the party line there, we're sunk. We are sunk. The founding fathers intended for the media to be a watchdog on the government. And if it gets corrupted by a lack of ethical imperative and personal backbone, there'll be hell to pay. Just like if you dissolved the legislative branch or the judicial or the executive, it would not be the same country. President Biden's dementia, for example, was well known to the press corps before it started being widely written about. There are things you can't not see when someone as high profile as a president is slipping that badly. Biden's debate with Trump was the only thing that forced the issue out into the open. I do have hope for the up and coming generation of men and women of America. They are young, which is good. However, the young tend to have big gaps in their knowledge of history, which makes them targets for tragic repeats of history. They want likes. In New York, they're going to have an election in a week. Zoran Mamdani, I hope I'm getting that right, is the pre-election leader. So take the issue of, for example, government-run grocery stores. It's one of his campaign pledges. With subsidized lower prices, government-run grocery stores would pose a threat to regular grocery stores. People will shop there instead of the place where they pay a third more for eggs and milk, and the other stores will eventually fold. I mean, that's what happens in free enterprise. So there's legitimate pro and con thoughts on this idea. I'm not just throwing it in the waste can, but it's an idea that needs a very, very intensive, prolonged discussion before you vote. It needs investigative journalists with boring spreadsheets. This issue is fundamental to the quality of life people living in New York because it's about food. I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I just don't think the required intensity of debate is happening in the mainstream press in New York. The press is too easily distracted by other things. Anyway, we'll see how the election goes. Personally, I hope Mamdani wins. And I mean that because I think sometimes it's the only way people learn. On the international front, and I'll close with this, the United States' two best allies in Asia, Japan and Korea, have always been strongly influenced by the U.S. Japan just recently got a new prime minister, a woman, which is a mind blower for them. It's their first one. And she's center right, and she seems to be doing pretty well. Korea recently elected a president who calls himself a democratic communist. That's like somebody calling themselves a MAGA Democrat. But young Koreans are listening, and many are nodding in approval. As soon as he took office, the newly elected President Lee began arresting everyone who played a role in opposing him, especially the mainstream Christian ministers who tend to be conservative. Korea is a very Christian country. He raided the churches. He also raided the opposition party for the crime of being the opposition party. He raided their headquarters. In a democracy, you're allowed, in fact, you're supposed to have an opposition party. He seized their membership rolls so he can take names. It's not a good sign. He also arrested Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, who founded Universal Peace Federation and this International Media Association for Peace that you're watching right now, and who works tirelessly for peace and reconciliation and is often referred to as the Mother of Peace. They threw her into a detention cell without even convicting her of anything. She's an 82-year-old great-grandmother who is legally blind and crippled. She has diabetes, she has congestive heart failure, and thyroid disease. Only a couple of weeks ago, just before she was put in detention, she was in the hospital with a heart procedure, and the likelihood of her having a stroke is very high. So they put her in a detention cell with no bed, just some blankets on the concrete floor. The entire cell is the size of a compact car, and it's unheated, and it's getting cold over there. Go out at night, stare up and look at the stars. You feel chilly. Being crippled, she has to crawl around the cell on her hands and knees. It's absolutely, utterly inhumane and cruel. It's religious persecution and it's elder abuse. It's now blatantly obvious the South Korea government's goal is to completely break her or kill her before her trial comes up. This is horrifying to anyone who knows Hak Ja Han Moon, because as I said, she is known globally and very affectionately as the Mother of Peace. Religious leaders, the kind who tend to oppose democratic communists, are increasingly being hauled off to prison. He's even starting to go after the mayor of Seoul, who's just a regular guy. President Trump has just finished making the rounds in Asia, or he's right in the middle of it. And he'll be going to Korea the next day or so, and then maybe China. But he just finished with Japan and Malaysia. He's aware of what's going on in Korea, so we'll see how that goes. So those are my comments. Peter, I hope your situation is unfrozen. I hope we have you back. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larry, very much. And yeah, thank you, Larry. It's a great history and overview of moderating the media. And I think a key word that you brought up was ethics. There's really no governing of ethics on the internet or other media outlets. And it seems like we have to police ourselves because apparently it's difficult for us to get the government to regulate that somehow. So, thank you so much for your comments. And I think we're happy to have Peter back with us. I introduced him earlier. So Peter, welcome back.
Yes. Yeah, my apologies. It's always good to have a tech-savvy wife. So I use her computer now, and it seems to work. Do you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, good evening, distinguished colleagues, media professionals, faith-based NGO representatives, and defenders of freedom from around the world. In our information-saturated age, the stories we tell and those we neglect to tell determine not only what people know, but what they believe is true. The subject I address this evening, media bias and democratic freedoms, protecting religious minorities, transcends theory and scholarship. It strikes at the core of our shared existence. For when the media betrays the vulnerable, the foundations of democracy are shaken. When one of our twin freedoms, belief and expression, crumbles, the other does not stand far behind. Article 18 and Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights were not drafted as separate pillars. They were laid side by side so that thought, conscience, religion, and voice could flourish together. Without the freedom to believe, expression becomes hollow. And without the freedom to speak, belief becomes invisible. There are two sides of the same coin. When one collapses, the other quickly follows. That is why media bias is not merely sloppy journalism. It is a profound human rights issue. A press that distorts realities doesn't only misreport. It shapes public perception. It shapes public perception, legitimizes repression, and corrodes democracy from within. Research confirms that this is a link. Diminished media freedom correlates with weakened democratic safeguards and increased rights violations. At the OSCE, I've attended a number of many conferences over the last 20 years in the OSCE. The OSCE has stated freedom of religion or belief and freedom of expression are mutually reinforcing and indispensably for democratic and the rule of law, for democracy and the rule of law. As the Washington Post reminds us, democracy dies in darkness. When journalism goes silent, or worse, joins the mob, democracy begins to die from within. In Rwanda, that process plays out under regular guise. Beginning in 2018, authorities mandated inspections of faith venues. And by 2024, the Rwanda Governance Board reported inspecting over 13,000 places of worship and closing more than 8,000 for alleged safety or registration violations. In 2024, hundreds more had been closed under similar pretexts. The language sounded harmless: compliance, modernization, standards, but the reality was stark. Pastors were silenced, congregations scattered, believers locked out of their sanctuaries. And the media? Most outlets simply echoed the official line. They wrote about regulations and permits, but not about religious freedom or human dignity. Whenever journalists merely repeat government talking points, persecution hides in plain sight and democracy loses its voice. The power of press can either be guardian of democracy or an enabler of its decline. Article 19 declares the right to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media. A free press should be democracy's watchdog, not its echo chamber. But when journalism becomes biased, sensationalist, or submissive, it stops defending freedom and begins enabling oppression. When a press system abandons religious minorities, it signals a broad erosion of freedom of religion and freedom of expression. Are not separate rights, they are deeply connected. As one UN mission summary puts it, they are indivisible and interdependent. That means that the media bears a heavy burden, not just to report facts, but to handle language, labels, and narratives with care. Because the way events are framed affects who is included in public life and who is pushed to its margins. Words, images, and headlines shape public opinion. That framing can either defend dignity or legitimize prejudice. One of the clearest dangers is now how minority faiths are casually branded with the S word, sect, or its cousin, cult. That would be the C word. That reminds us of the dark past when the N word was used as a racial slur against people of color. Being labeled as a sect member can wound, exclude, and delegitimize in equally damaging ways. And yet journalists keep using it freely, sometimes dozens of times in a single report. In Austria, for instance, just very recently, the national broadcaster ORF recently used the word sacked 13 times in just 2 minutes of airtime. An extreme case of the media's fixation with the S word. It seems the term sells outrage. Many journalists just love it because it signals scandal. Behind this obsession lies not only organized anti-cult networks, such as fakeries, but also plain journalistic laziness, reliance on Wikipedia entries, decades-old dossiers, or press releases disguised as facts. Over time, these shortcuts harden into common sense prejudice. Common sense prejudice. In France, the state agency Miviludes, getting financed by the state heavily, circulates lists of alleged sects, these are blacklists, that many journalists cite as neutral facts, turning yoga practitioners, Pentecostals, Buddhists, and new Christian movements into public suspects. This systematic framing, stigma embedded in blacklists, amplified in media, sets the stage for more serious consequences. Let's talk about Russia. Consider Russia. In Russia, where independent media have been stamped out and journalists have been killed by state actors, the process has already reached its decisive moment. Years of demonization in state-controlled media paved the way for the outright banning of faith communities, such as the Jehovah's Witnesses. In April 2017, the Supreme Court of Russia banned Jehovah's Witnesses as extremists. Human Rights Watch reported that more than 200,000 believers were forced underground into exile. Over 2,000 homes were raided, hundreds were imprisoned, their kingdom halls confiscated or destroyed. A single label, extremist cult, turned peaceful worship into a criminal act. Once a label is normalized, repression is only one step away. Now, I'd like to talk about headlines. Headlines that kill reputations, or it smells but it sells. If words can stigmatize, headlines can crucify. Research shows that roughly 60 to 70% of readers never read beyond the headline. For most, the headline is the story. When journalism trades truth for outrage, it does more than misinform. It destroys trust and weakness, and it destroys trust and weakens democracy. There's a case study, for example, BBC and the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification. In October 2023, the BBC ran the headline, Japan asks court to dissolve Moonist Church over Shinzo Abe killings. I repeat that. Japan asks court to dissolve Moonist Church over Shinzo Abe killing. Two things stand out. First, the use of the term Moonies, a word the faith community regards as a slur. Second, the headline fuses the name of the church with the act of assassination. The assassin of the former Prime Minister, Abe, was a lone individual acting from personal grievance with no organizational link to the church. Yet, pairing church and killing, the headline effectively exonerated the killer, who vanished from view, and implicitly convicted the faith community before any court had spoken. And this headline wasn't an isolated case. Between the Abe assassination in 2022 and today, dozens of outlets around the world have recycled nearly identical headlines, linking faith communities to crime, scandal, or dissolution. What began as a tragedy turned into a 3-year headline campaign. This is not investigative reporting. It is character assassination by headline. And because it came from one of the world's most trusted media brands, the damage reverberated worldwide. Why does this happen? Because a long-standing newsroom mantra goes, if it bleeds, it leads. And increasingly across the mainstream press, it smells but it sells. Shock generates clicks. Outrage pays the bills. For minority faiths, that framing leads to marginalization, social ostracism. By the way, ostracism has nothing to do with Austria. I just want to clarify this. And even legal persecution, often long before any due process takes place. Now let us turn to real-world evidence. Global case studies of media bias and persecution. Let's first take Japan. After the Abe assassination, thousands of articles attacked the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification. Government officials, anti-cult lawyers, and mainstream media built a firewall of hostility. Believers' voices were excluded. Recently, even 4 UN special rapporteurs and numerous international experts have since condemned Japan's cult policies as a major religious liberty crisis. South Korea. Suspicion of minority religions remains pervasive. Even the Yoido Full Gospel Church, one of the world's largest Pentecostal congregations, faced smear campaigns. More alarming still, the 80-year-old Dr. Hak-Chan Moon, co-founder of the UPF, was placed in pre-trial detention weeks after heart surgery, as Larry has told us before. Rather than question this measure, much of the press recycled outdated stereotypes again. Nigeria and Sub-Saharan Africa. Between 2019 and 2023, nearly 56,000 people were killed and 21,000 abducted in violence with a clear religious dimension, mostly Christians. Massacres, such as Yelvata 2025, left hundreds dead and thousands displaced. Yet, Western media routinely reduced these atrocities to ethnic clashes or farmer-herder disputes. This silence, this refusal to name genocide for what it is, it's not neutrality, it is complicity. When the media is silent in the face of genocide, silence itself becomes an accomplice to the crime. China. I just want to mention, before I continue, that especially Africa, in Africa, there's a tremendous Christian genocide taking place in different countries. And the media is really silent about it. This is kind of frustrating if you are into human rights and if you are informed about these incidents. China. The Communist Party has mastered state propaganda. Uyghur Muslims, Tibetan Buddhists, Falun Gong practitioners, and unregistered Christian house churches are branded as cults or terrorists. Once labeled, they are stripped of rights, detained, or forced into re-education. State media transforms persecution into policy and propaganda into truth. Hungary, that's our neighbors here. Right now in Vienna, Hungary is very close by. In 2011, the Orban government stripped more than 300 churches of legal recognition, just after Viktor Orban got his two-thirds majority. So, most media outlets called this reform. But when the same regime later attacked, just about a year or 2 years later, attacked independent journalism, and many independent media outlets were bought or closed down, reporters realized too late. The assault on religion had paved the way for the assault on the press. India. In 2024, Christian organizations documented over 800 attacks and wrongful arrests. In Manipur, sectarian violence displaced 60,000 people and destroyed nearly 400 churches. Much of the Indian media called it a law and order issue, refusing to name religious persecution. From one region to another, the patterns repeats. Media bias leads to stigma, which prompts state action, then brings repression, and ultimately results in the loss of freedom. State-controlled outlets rarely challenge power. They reinforce it. Blacklists, for example, by Miviludes in France, hand journalists prefabricated stigmas. Meanwhile, commercial media participate in the business of outrage because outrage sells. The outcome, minority faith communities are frequently caricatured, scapegoated, criminalized, with the press more complicit than protective. Speaking truth to power is a shared responsibility. That's a big media slogan. Speaking truth to power describes the mission of our media, actually. Defending freedom is everyone's task. Journalists must verify before publishing, avoid stigmatizing labels, and let minorities speak for themselves. Editors must treat headlines as promises, not hammers. Regulators and public broadcasters must monitor systemic bias and ensure taxpayer-funded media that serve all citizens, especially minorities. Faith communities and civil society must monitor coverage, respond factually, and share stories of peace-building, humanitarian aid, and interfaith cooperation. This is very important. If hostile networks can flood journalists with prejudice, defenders of freedom can flood them with truth and hope. Now I want to come to a closing. We are not here to silence critics. Scrutiny, honest, balanced scrutiny, is vital for democracy. But scrutiny without fairness becomes slander. When media bias targets religious minorities, it harms not only those communities, It undermines the moral core of democracy itself. A free press should defend the vulnerable, not endanger them. Challenge power, not equal power. Mahatma Gandhi once said, the true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. How true. When the press stays silent in the face of injustice, that silence becomes complicity. I commend the Universal Peace Federation USA and the International Media Association for Peace, IMA, for organizing this important dialogue and elevating it to the international level. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Peter. That was you made so many profound statements there. It would be I think we have to watch it over again just to hear everything that you said. That was an excellent presentation. And just to kind of reiterate something that you had commented on, it's not just slandering religion or character assassination, but it does lead to further development, like banning religions and even physical violence being perpetrated upon certain religious groups. So that's, we have to look at that as well. And another point too is, like you mentioned, it's not just the active words of the media, but the silence sometimes from the media. And we see that taking place in Nigeria with the Christian population there, and of course the Uyghurs and Falun Gong, and in China as well. So it's the silence of the media that is not helping the situation as well. So I think something you said also kind of resonated with what Larry said, and it comes down to ethics and of trying to sell the story and pay the bills. So somehow we have to address that issue of ethics in the media. And that's what, as Peggy mentioned when we started, this is sponsored by the International Media Association for Peace, which is one of the associations of UPF. And we're striving to find ethical journalists like yourselves, like you and Larry. So thank you so much for your presentation. And perhaps before we go to any questions, I don't know if Peter or Larry, if you have any follow-up comments from each other's presentation that you'd like to say. Larry, go ahead. You have to unmute. Unmute. Larry, you're muted.
I'm new
There we
to
go.
technology. Okay. Peter, I enjoyed your presentation very much. I followed it very closely. You prepared very well for this, and you had so much information. You said the headline is the whole story for most people, or majority, 60 or 70 something percent like that, and readers don't read beyond that. In the US, younger people are not reading as much of anything as they used to, because there's so much on the internet that's visual, books. And nobody I know goes out in the morning and goes to the newsstand and buys a newspaper, except people that live in newsstand cities like New York, stuff like that. But we have this term, we use it, called YouTube brain rot.
Yeah.
And it's to identify the problem. Is our visual sense, is this the same way in Europe? Is the visual sense becoming overweight?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Very similar here. In fact, Europe, in Europe, there are now hardly any young people are still reading newspapers or anything. They are all into social media, get information from there, you know. And but still, headlines count there too, you know. Because if you do social media, you have to be very good with headlines. I am doing a lot of social media work.
It's all headlines.
It's all headlines, right?
Yeah, that's why. Are you learning how to do clickbait?
Clickbait, yeah, right, exactly. Yeah,
That's why you can't trust anything in the on the internet anymore, because the headline will be completely misleading.
exactly. It's a
And
big problem.
yeah, uh,
Well,
yeah,
Larry, I enjoyed your presentation very much. I I usually follow what's going on in America,
uh-huh.
but I always have to, watch several different channels because they're very kind of biased channels. You have to find out what's true by comparing them.
Well, there's not an unbiased channel. You find one that conforms to your biases, and then you like it, and so you watch that.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
what I do. I find one that conforms to my biases. I,
Okay.
I watch a lot of stuff. I listen to everything. My favorite radio station is National Public Radio, which has
Yeah.
run into some difficulties, but
Well, Larry, I just wanted to say I didn't get the opportunity earlier because of this confusion we had with my laptop. Uh, I feel very privileged and grateful to be on the panel with you together because I have known you for quite a while, but I always admired your incredible competence in media matters. You're a real, seasoned professional, and it's a pleasure to be with you on the panel together, and
thank
of
you
course
very
Ray
much,
too.
Peter. I have always felt kind of in your shadow in the area, especially religious freedom, and you are the consummate scholar.
Well,
Yeah.
someone made the comment in our chat that both of you should submit your presentation to the editorial page of the Washington Times and other papers. So perhaps the story
It,
will continue. We
it's
have a
longer than
question.
700 words, so it wouldn't.
All right.
We have a question from the chat from Melissa Prozel, if I may ask for either one of you. And it relates again to what we talked about earlier concerning ethics in journalism. Any ideas how to reduce or eliminate the greed motive or ability of media and strengthen the original ideal altruistic motives of revealing truth for the real benefit of society, other than forcing all journalists to have a theology degree before applying? So again, it's kind of an ethical, how do we bring that ethics
A
into
theology
journalism?
degree would make them worse.
Yeah.
I think as long as you have the internet, you're not going to have journalistic ethics, because the internet has no guiding ethics. Also, journalism school, they may brush lightly over journalistic ethics, but based on the people that apply to news organizations that I'm aware of, a lot of them want to get a job so they can help take down some of these, whoever that is they identify as a villain. They have an axe to grind. And when I was studying journalism, our professors always said, you have to, they really, every class, they talked about the ethical considerations. The thing, editors and journalists don't have friends. That was something.
Right.
We had talked earlier about the international religious freedom acts here in the United States, legislation, but also the United Nations. Peter, you had brought it up as well, that the United Nations has set up regulations on human rights and religious freedoms, but it seems difficult to enforce. So I don't know, do either of you have any solutions? I don't know if that's kind of putting on a diplomatic hat, taking off your journalistic hat and putting on a diplomatic hat, perhaps. But how can we enforce some of these regulations? And it's difficult enough in communist nations, but how about in what we consider democratic nations, like Peter, you were mentioning in Europe, Hungary, and other nations that
Yeah.
supposed to be following these human rights legislation, but apparently they're violating them.
Yeah. with the United Nations, we have some experience. As you know, my organization, which I co-founded, 4F Europe, Forum for Religious Freedom Europe, we have been taking part in quite a few side events at the United Nations. And you just have to do advocacy. You have to be there, you have to show up, and you have to publish about it. I mean, recently we had a successful intervention in Geneva, and a side event, and some of our foreign friends were there. And Patricia Duval, she's an international lawyer, and she did a brilliant job. And Dr. Jan Fiegel, who is now the president of my organization, FOREF, and he gave a speech there, which was very, very powerful, very convincing. And the rapporteurs of the United Nations, they listened to that. Or at least one, and they got the others on board. And four rapporteurs then made a statement, made a press release to rebuke Japan. But that's how it works, you know. That's how it works.
And is it effective, Peter? Is it effective? Is the UN mostly effective within the UN community? Or if somebody's doing something in another country that people don't like, is a letter from the UN or 4 letters from the UN is it going to change?
It does. They you know, nobody likes headlines from the UN. You know, nobody likes a rebuke from the UN. It's not good for your national image. Everybody presents. I attended many of these OSCE conferences. OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation Europe, with 57 membership states. And so I made some statements there almost every year. And, you know, the interesting thing is that there are 57 government delegations there. And the delegates, the delegate from a particular government gives his presentation. And if you listen to these national representatives' presentations, you get the feeling this is the ideal country. They post so much with what, you know, how good they are in performing human rights and rule of law and so. And in reality, you know what's going on, because the good thing about these kind of conferences, the OSCE, the good thing about it is, you know, there are a few hundred NGO representatives there, and they know very well what the real story is, and they get that chance, just 2 minutes maybe, but they get that chance to, you know, speak up.
Yeah, UN speeches are all what, 3 minutes?
Yes. But you get used to that, you know. You get used to it. But it definitely works. I can say, for example, in Austria here, I kind of rebuked Austria in front of 57 government delegations about 10 times in the OSCE conferences, 10 times, because of the restrictive law on religion. And what happened? Many things changed, you know. Many things changed. In Austria, we have you know, a lot of things have changed, and even my own faith community has now officially been registered as a faith community, one of the 11 faith communities, and you know, it works. Advocacy works.
Okay.
My friends of faith, they always told me, you should not yell at the Austrian government so much. You should show some love. But the opposite is true. You know, the more I yelled at them, the more they respected me. And yeah, that's how it works. Of course, you need media.
Yeah.
So we worked with press releases. You know, 4F has made almost hundreds of press releases over the years. You know, and
media doesn't show love. Media,
that's right.
and governments respond to pressure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I put the 4f-europe.org site on the chat, so I encourage everybody to look at it.
Okay, good.
Peter's the founder of this organization, and
Co-founder.
as we mentioned, it's one of the leading religious advocacy groups in Europe now. So, congrats on that, Peter.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think again, advocacy works, as Peter said, and that's what we're trying to do with this format that we do in our IMAP webinars to get the message out, religious freedom and religious persecution, and try to stand up as advocates for it. So thank you to both Peter and Larry for being with us today. We've kind of run out of time. I don't know if either of you would like to just give a little closing statement before we conclude. Just a
Larry?
final wrap-up
I
thought.
have something devastating to say. I think the internet is going to be the end of civilization. As much as we depend on. I think I'll just close with that.
Okay.
Right.
Well, I would just like to say something about IMAP. I have a lot of hope for IMAP, to be honest. Whenever I talk to journalists and I tell them about IMAP, they want to know more about it, and journalists are now seeking alliances, and they are seeking safe spaces where they can share their problems, and also address issues beyond their own little local,
Yeah, people should go to upf.usa and look at past episodes of the International Media Association for Peace, IMAP's monthly webinars.
Right.
I've covered some fantastic topics. I mean, you really get into the weeds, and I think your team is doing a great job.
Thank you. Great.
Yes, it was nice to co-partner with Europe today, Peter coming from Austria. And just a thank you to everyone who joined us today. And as a reminder, every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, UPF has a webinar on different topics from the different associations of the Universal Peace Federation. And our IMAP is the fourth Tuesday of each month. So you can join us in November for our next conversation. And you can see the recordings, as Larry mentioned, at us.upf.org. You can go on there to see all the past program webinars that we've had. So again, thank you, Peter, Larry, and all of you who joined us online and on Facebook. Thank you so much, and hope to see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.